Tyranids. We have painted up some of the hive fleets before, including a speed paint option for Jormungandr. And today we are diving back into the bowels of that hive fleet, painting up a larger bug to a slightly higher standard. Just to jump in and interrupt myself before I've even begun, it's worth pointing out that for demonstration purposes, we're painting the carapace first. And that's just to avoid a bunch of clutter from the rest of the model, because I think that's a key point in this scheme. But in reality, if you were painting it, I would suggest doing the other way around, so skin and claws first, and I will cover the reason as to why later. Starting from a black to white zenithal prime, we can tackle painting the carapace, which in this scheme is going to be yellow. And naturally, that means that we're going to need to grab two paints for this base coat, and that is going to be a bright red and a yellowish beige. Mixing these up until we have a reddish, pinkish skin tone, and then we can use this across the model. When we're applying this first darker red skin tone that we've mixed up, we want to be aiming for the shadows and the darker areas of carapace. And we can do that in a couple of different styles. So for example here, we've gone in and done all of the carapace sections near where they overlap. So where you've got a panel overlapping, we've then gone in and done some shadow there to give us a bit of depth in those areas. But we also went round and essentially picked out areas that were opposite our main source of light for the model, making sure that the yellow sections on one side was slightly stronger because there's the other half of the model in the way of the light that's coming past it. Once we have worked around the model and built out all of the shadows, we can then start to add a little bit more beige to our mix, mixing it in until we have a lighter, more natural skin tone. Applying this on all of the areas that we didn't coat with the first darker layer. We can also use this as an opportunity to pull back some of that darker base if we went a little bit too far with any of the shadow tone. Then what we can do is add yet more beige and then apply our third coat. And we are going to be focusing this more on the highlights, targeting the edges as well as the centers of any of our last layers in relatively broad strokes in order to build up some brightness. We will be coming back and doing a lot more highlighting in a moment, and that's why we want a relatively broad highlight at this stage so that we can come in and do ordinary highlights, thin edge highlights, and everything beyond. And for that first stage of our normal highlighting, we're coming in with a beige. Taking the pure beige, we can apply our first round of edge highlights and spot highlights, picking out all of the areas that we want to have a punch of brightness, but this will also help to bring clarity and separation to the areas on the model before we start to go in and apply that final brightening. We will be working towards white next, but we don't want to go straight from beige into white. So first what we're going to need to do is make up another mid-tone, mixing our beige and white, using this as a fine edge highlight before we can then grab the pure white and use this on the sharpest points. It's probably worth pointing out that these last two steps is where we also came in and applied the various striation marks down the carapace. On some of the schemes, you will notice that as well as the change in shadow to brightness across the actual carapace scale, there are occasionally lines that run down it in a vertical or horizontal, depending which way the model is, along those carapace lines. And we recreated that using the beige-white mix as well as the white. The other option is we could have just come through and been applying that on every single layer. However, I tend to find that in the method that we're using here, by doing that, it can get slightly messy overall. And by using the method that we've done in this video, we lose a little bit of that depth from building it up over so many layers, but we get a little bit more clarity and a little more precision on where we want those lighter striation marks to be. We are now just going to quickly take a short step away from the carapace and move on to the other areas on the model. For the moment, we're going to be starting with the black skin. And to start the black skin, we are naturally going to need a dark blue. Do not worry, rippers have not eaten my brain. There is some method to this madness. But yes, we are going to be starting from a dark blue, which will be applied over all of the skin sections of our Tyranid. We want to avoid the claws when doing this, as well as the skin by the claws, and naturally as well as the carapace that we've already painted, if you've painted it at this point. The reason we need to leave the claw skin clear is because once we've gone down and applied this blue base, what we want to do is grab a little bit of a bright red and then apply this across those areas. Then once this blue is down and the red is dry, we can come in and apply some highlights in the form of a lighter, brighter blue. This brighter blue can be applied over very large, bold areas, highlighting across the main panels as well as all of the sharp edges. Now, this is going to look incredibly stark on the model, especially since in our case, we've painted the carapace in a skin stage and then stopped there. But don't worry, it is all part of the plan. What we're now going to be doing is grabbing a dark bluey black contrast and using that in our next few steps. Carefully, taking our diluted contrast, we want to work around all of the skin on the model that we've previously painted in blue, ensuring that we give everything a complete coat of this contrast. We used a mix of 1-to-1 contrast medium and contrast paint for all of the contrast painting we did on this model. We want to make sure that we get a nice good coat of this application so that the recesses do become that nice dark black and the raised areas get tinted as you would expect with a normal contrast application, ensuring that we've hit all of the areas of skin that were blue as well as the sections of red skin that we painted. We can then leave this to dry and get started on the claws. We can mix up some paints that we used earlier in the form of the dark blue from the skin as well as the red from the carapace mix. We can mix these two paints together to make a nice dark purpley red, applying this as a base across all of the claws or any of the red weapon areas. We are then going to work in a similar way to our carapace. First, mixing in more and more of the red as we apply smaller and smaller applications of this lighter mix until we are at the stage of highlighting in pure red. We want to make sure that the pure red stage that we're applying is the broad highlight. We want to make sure that we're leaving room to go from broad highlight through various thinner edge highlights. And the reason that we're making sure that the broad highlight is red is because we're going to be pushing the color a bit further. And to do that, we're going to need some beige. Going round and applying the beige and red mix essentially represents the same application as the white and beige that we applied on the carapace, solely aiming to bridge the gap from the current red to an application of pure beige, which will be applied after we've finished the red and beige mix. The beige is going to be applied in your regular thin edge highlight, going round picking out any edges and sharp points, and we can also use this as the opportunity to add any striations on the claws. We are now able to come in and finish off those last few areas, mainly being the carapace, which is currently painted in a skin section, and we need to make it yellow, as well as the claws, which are painted up to a nice beige tone, and we need some red for those. Kicking off first by finishing the claws. Here we can dilute a bright red contrast and then apply this across all of the claws, weapons, and any areas that we may have selected as red. This will cover all of the areas, but generally not affecting the darker areas too much because they will be dark red already. But we will see it shift the brighter beige areas into a bright punchy red while still harmonizing the overall outcome. We can then take the opportunity to also come in and paint any of the arm veins across the model with some red contrast. Then we have the carapace, and here we've got it painted to our nice skin tone, and we can start to apply a bright yellow contrast. This thinned contrast will perfectly shade all of the skin and pink sections into a lovely dark rich yellow orange, while making the edges that we've painted brighter into that punchy venomous yellow that we like so much, while keeping rich depth across the model. Now finally, I did mention at the start of the video that we painted the carapace basing first, though we probably shouldn't have, and there is a reason that I promised I would tell you about, and partially it's because of this. We had to touch up the carapace quite a lot, mainly because of the black contrast stage. Despite trying to be careful, there was a lot of areas of the odd spot and splatter that led to a lot of touch-up being needed. Also, as a free tip, if you're happening to be using black contrast and you're using a base as a well palette, try not to keep that well palette directly below the model you're painting, just in case. Overall, we did manage to mostly correct a lot of the issues that we had with spots and splatters from things like the contrast. And we did end up with a really nice bug that all we need to do is stick onto a base. The areas that got the black contrast and any of the other areas of color that may have got across the model, essentially what we had to do is just repeat the steps from the first set of the video. So mixing up a skin tone out of our beige and our red that's roughly the same as the area around it where the black spots were, then mix in more beige and white until we get to a brighter tone, rebuilding the striations if we need to. And to be honest, I quite like how this came out. But I would suggest if you are going to be following this along, I would do it by painting the skin first, then coming in and doing the claws, and then painting the carapace, rather than the order that we did in this video, just to make it easier to see how the carapace was painted. So bear that in mind. But here's the overall outcome, and I'd be interested to know how you think it looks. Is there anything that you would change? Anything that you think we could do that would improve this scheme? Now, as I said, this is kind of an extension to a previous video where we focused on painting the swarm side. This is great for your bigger bugs and your characters that you want to spend a little bit more time on. But what if you're painting a horde of termagants? Well, in that case, check out this video because that's probably going to help you out. Otherwise, you're going to need to subscribe so that we can see you next time.